So this video is going to go pretty quick. We got a few things to do for gameplay UI, meaning the UI that we are able to view while we're actually playing the game. All we're going to do is add a clock and add a red overlay as we take damage. So I'll go ahead and show us what we got. We can see that a clock starts, and we can see as we take damage, the screen turns redder and redder, kind of adding a little bit of tension to our game, until we just can't take it anymore and the screen gets red, oh so red, and we're done. All right, great. We can see that our clock up there displays our times in seconds, and we're taking damage to our play field and increasing the red on our field. Okay, let's see how we can do this. So reiterating, the only things we need to do in this video are display the clock UI and add a red overlay that increases intensity as the playfield shrinks. So why don't we go ahead and see how we can set up the clock. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of disable some of the UI elements to make working with my UI a little bit easier. And we'll just turn off the start menu and the white image fade, so we can just focus on our clock. All right, because we don't want to have to, when we're building our clock out, we don't want to have to worry about the start screen getting in our way while we're viewing our work scene right here. All right, so all we're going to do is, with UI canvas selected, we're going to actually go to UI, and we're going to make an image, and let's call this clock background image. All right, and it's kind of over here. Let's go into 2D mode so we can really view our background image, and I'm going to place my background image kind of near the top up here. And I'm going to use my Rect Transform tool up here in the top right. That way I can line up and center my image. And what I'm going to do is, I don't like that white background, so I'm going to go and use one of the sprites that's preloaded with Unity. You can even go in and make your own background if you want to. And I want to kind of make a smaller background, position it at the top of my playing field. I'm going to set its anchor points to the top middle, right there in the middle of the field right there. And there we go. All right, so we now need to put a text element, parent that under our clock background image, and there's our text. I want to zoom in here a little bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to position its dimensions to match my background image. I want my text to always be scaling with its background image, like so. And I'm also going to set its anchor points, grab these little white arrows right here, to match my background as well. And what we'll do is we'll call this clock text. And why don't we go in and adjust our alignment. And I want to give a placeholder value right there, so we can kind of get a preview of what our clock is going to look like in our game scene. All right, 0, 0 by 0, 0. And let's increase that scale, that font size a little bit, rather. All right, great. Well, we've got our clock built. So why don't we go in and see how we can code it now. So to manage our clock, we're going to go into our code now, and let's open up our game manager class. All right, we're back here again. First thing we're going to do is create a new public variable of type text this time, because we want to get at that clock text. We're going to name this variable clock text. We'll hit Control S to save it. And why don't we minimize my develop? And now if I go to my game manager, I have a clock text option right here. And I'm just going to take that clock text we just made and drag and drop it and assign it to the clock text right here. That way we can access the text field in our clock right here. And we'll update our text field as we're going through our game. All right, so now we just have to update the actual text of our clock. So why don't we do that? Let's find the code where we're managing all of our timers. And right underneath the equations where we figure out minutes and seconds, why don't we say clock text? We're accessing that variable. And we're going to access the text of that clock. And we're going to say minutes plus, and then we're going to add the little colon right there. Oh, don't want to do that. And then plus seconds. So that was pretty easy because we did a lot of work already with our timer right here. We already have the equations that converts our game timer to minutes, and we even already made the transition to change that minutes to a string because our clock text field up here, this takes a string value. What we see in this field right here and right here is controlled by this field, and it only takes strings. So by setting our minutes to string earlier, to update our clock is really simple, just a few bits of code. We'll hit Control S to save. And why don't we test our game? And there we go. We see my clock updating and running. So why don't we go ahead and turn back on some of our UI elements. I'm going to go in and turn on my Start Menu canvas and my white image fade. And let's start the game now. Okay, we see some problems. Our clock is automatically starting its countdown, plus it's being shown in our start screen. So we're not really getting an accurate representation of how much time has passed in our game so far. I mean, we started out at like 10 seconds when we actually started our game. So why don't we fix that real quick? All right, all we have to do is disable our clock background at the very start of the game. So we'll go in and we'll manually disable our clock background. And we need to figure out a way, and when we do our start game function, to enable that clock. But we have a little bit of a problem here. We don't really have a way to get at our clock background image. We can only get at our clock text, because when we made our public variable, we're just concerned with our clock text. Well, we're going to do some code where we're going to actually be able to access the parent of clock text by using some transforms. So we'll say clock text dot transform dot parent. So we're actually looking at the parent of our clock text element dot game object. Then we're going to point at the game object of our parent, and then we'll set active to true. And this line of code effectively uses our clock text field right here and says, look at the parent here, then look at the game object, and then just check that to true. So why don't we go ahead and test that? All right, so I've started the game, and when I press one player, oh, we still have a problem though. We still started out at 3 or 4 seconds when we started the game. So to reiterate that point, I'm going to let some seconds tick by in the start menu. And then we started out at 6 seconds. So we need to get a way to reset our clock to 0 as soon as our game starts. And that's pretty easy as well. In our start game function right here, why don't we just go ahead and reset the game timer to 0. So technically, if we go ahead and activate our clock background, and we'll see how that's working. So technically, we're still counting down seconds in our start menu, but when we start the game, the clock resets itself to 0. And since we don't even see our clock background image, we're not even aware that our clock is counting down time right now. So I've started the game, and there we go. Our clock appears, and our text is starting from 0. All right, so that's how we make our clock. And you can spend more time designing the look and background of your clock. I just did it the most straightforward way because I really wanted to get into the code of that. All right, so why don't we look at how we can add that red overlay real quickly. All right, so I'm back. To add the red fade image, it's going to be just like we were making our white fade image. In fact, we could probably duplicate white fade, and let's kind of get them together. And I want my white fade image above my red fade image. Why don't I go ahead, to avoid confusion, why don't I go ahead and rename this red fade image, like so. And I'll go in and select it and adjust its color. And there's my color menu, and I'll make it red. All right. So, okay, what we wanted to do was the order in which things are drawn in our UI canvas. If red is below white, then it gets drawn over white. But if white is below red, then it gets overdrawn on the red. So why don't we go ahead and put our red fade image above the white right here? That way, white will always denote when a game starts and ends. It'll kind of overwrite that red fade image. We only want the red fade image to be visible when we're playing the game. So when we go to a game over screen in the future, this white fade image will be able to override our red overlay that we're about to create. All right, so now all we really have to do is go back into our game manager, and we're going to create another public variable, and we can just saddle up on our white fade image, and this time let's call it red fade image. Hit Control S. We'll save and compile our code. So now we can select our game manager. We should have a red fade image slot right here, and we'll just drag and drop red fade image right there. So now we have access to our red fade image. So I'm going to go ahead and deactivate that white. So what we want to do is we want to tie the color of our red fade image and the alpha channel of that color. We want to tie that to the life of our playing field. So over time, this alpha value keeps increasing. All right. And what this value doesn't show you is in code, this 0 to 255 value is actually normalized from 0 to 1. All right. So we have an RGB value of 255, but in the code, this whole little range right here is normalized from 0 to 1. So at 1, our image is completely opaque, and this alpha value is 255. Notice I've used the term normalize a few times. Well, that's going to be really important because when we start writing our code, we'll have to take that into consideration that our alpha channel value is normalized when we start messing with it. So what we're going to have to do is now adjust the alpha of the red fade image and link it to our area health. So we got to figure out a good spot for that. Why don't we do it? We have to do it in the void update. And why don't we just kind of pick a place inside of our void update? I'm going to do it at the bottom of my void update function. Okay. So right here, what we're going to say is we have to get at that alpha channel of our red fade image. But before we can do that, we have to make a placeholder variable for the color of the red fade image. So we'll say color, and we'll just give this a temporary value, temporary alpha, temp A, equals red fade image dot color. All right. So this temporary value variable that we created is of type color, and it's going to allow us to point at this little color chart right here. All right. So we're not really getting to our alpha yet. That'll come in the next line of code. So right now, every frame we're setting our temporary color variable to the color of our red fade image, our red overlaid image. And like I said, next we have to adjust the alpha channel by the area health. But a few things are happening here. All right. If we go to our game manager and let's just press play and get in there. Let me unpause it. Let me demonstrate this by deactivating our red fade. So when we're playing our game, let me select my game manager. We have an area health value right here. And when it's healthy, it's set at 1. And notice how it ticks downwards. So technically, whenever our area health over here is 1, then our alpha of our red fade image, let me bring that back up. Then the alpha of our red fade image should be 0, meaning there is no way. Let me unpause this. So when our area of our health is 1, then our alpha should be 0, meaning we haven't taken any damage. As our area health decreases, meaning we're taking more damage, we want to increase our alpha. So you can kind of see a problem we're having. Our two values here are kind of inverted from one another. So we have to take that kind of math into account. And remember, when we're working with our code, this alpha channel is normalized from 0 to 1. So it'll be like our area health, and its values will be decimal points that kind of say where along the slider are we at to control the transparency. So I will go ahead and knock its alpha channel down to 0 because we want to start with no red overlay. All right. So the next bit of code will be very important. We'll say temp A, which is our placeholder variable to get at the color of our red overlay image, our red fade image. And we'll say A. So now we're pointing at the alpha channel within the color wheel right up here. So temp.A is now pointing at this slider right here. We'll say that it's equal to, and then we're going to take into account the inverse of our health. So we'll say the value of one float minus our area health. And that'll basically say, okay, if we have a lot of area health, then we want to set our alpha of our red overlay to a small value. So that's kind of taking care of the inverse situation we had there. And then we just need to update our red fade image color. So we'll just say red fade image dot color equals temp A. And that's all we have to do. Those 3 lines of code will affect our red fade. So here we make our temporary variable and we set it to equal to the red overlay's color. And here we're constantly adjusting that temporary value by the inverse amount of our current area health. And then we update our color value of our red overlay or red fade image equal to this temporary value that we're solving for, the temporary alpha value that we're solving for. So now let's go ahead and let's reactivate all of our UI elements correctly. So I'll press play. Now we're playing. And why don't I increase the amount of damage we take? I'll go to boundary amount, increase that to about 0.5. And hopefully this should work. So we'll start our game. There we go. We're starting to see a little bit of red there. It's getting a little bit more red. Even redder. It's perfect. Now we're getting redder and redder. I'll pause this right now. And why don't we take a look at our red fade image? Let's take a look at its alpha. It's at 170 right now. So we're really having direct control over the transparency of that overlay image we've made. And it directly corresponds to the area health we have over here. So that kind of makes sense, right? The less area health we have, the higher our alpha channel is going to get. Until eventually our area health reaches basically 0. I mean, it's really low, 0.05. While our red image over here, I mean, it's almost at 255 right there. Until eventually we lose and the game starts over. So that's how we add a little bit of pizzazz to our game, making it a little bit more dynamic, making it juicy. All right, guys, that'll do it for this chapter. Really quick, but really important type of code that adds a lot to our moment-to-moment gameplay of our small little game here.